For the last couple of months, I've been working hard on rebuilding my project called Liquid Lungs. It's a true FPS parkour game where the controls are kinda like if Titanfall and Max Payne had a baby and the baby's room was painted in mirror edge themed colors. In this video, I will show you what has changed, how it was done, and give you a glimpse of where it's all headed. Do I have a roadmap? Maybe. Before we dive into the new features, let's take a quick look at where we started. Initially, Liquid Lungs featured a player without a full body mesh, just the typical floating FPS arms paired with a simpler, cartoon-like aesthetics. While the controls were kinda fun, they didn't quite capture the fluid parkour experience I had planned for. Here we have The Pulse, Liquid Lungs' new main character. Now with an actual body mesh, the parkour feels a lot more engaging. And we also have some updated goons, a new standard enemy type. We'll take a closer look later in this video on how all of this are set up. Additionally, there were some core architectural code changes I wanted to implement. So these factors drove me to remake the entire project from the ground up. So for the movement, I do almost all of my logic in C++, with a few exceptions like certain functions in the animation blueprints. The player's movement is managed for a finite state machine, ensuring each movement state, such as sliding or wall running, remains isolated and only executes its logic when active. Additionally, I use delegates to broadcast events, like when the player switches movement states or lands, which allows other systems, like animations or sound, to respond without tightly coupling their code to the movement logic. There are a lot of functional upgrades in the movement code that really enhance how it feels to play. For instance, when climbing over a corner, the player no longer just drags the capsule collider across the edge with a shaky camera. Now the character smoothly transitions into a crouch state, moves over the corner, then stands back up, resulting in a far more natural and satisfying motion, especially with the updated animations. As another example, wall running now begins the moment you jump onto a wall, allowing the first run to follow an arc and feel much more fluid. And there are many more little tweaks like these, and they all add up, making the gameplay experience noticeably better overall. Before we take a look at the animations, we must first have a peek at how the meshes are set up. Let's go back to the Pulse mesh. This is what the player models look like during gameplay. I experimented with a lot of solutions and ended up using 3 separate meshes. One for the FPS arms, one for the player's lower body, and a third that's hidden from the player but visible in shadows and reflections. I tried making it work with a single mesh by attaching the camera to the head bone and offsetting the bone movement relative to the camera. However, every approach I came up with involved compromises. Either the FPS arms or the camera didn't behave quite right, so I ultimately decided the 3 mesh setup was the best solution. For me, tight FPS controls are super important to make the game fun, so compromising on the arm's position, even slightly lagging behind where they should be, or any form of unintended screen shake is an absolute no deal from my side. I'm using a metahuman as the base body mesh, with a custom mesh for the hair. Each piece of clothing is its own skeletal mesh, which isn't great for performance, but makes it easy to prototype and experiment with. Since I want players to collect and customize outfits later, I can't just bake all the clothing directly onto the character model, but I do plan to change this. A new feature in Unreal Engine 5.5, the mutable system, looks like it could make adding cloths inside Unreal Engine much easier, eliminating the need for weight painting in separate software. I haven't tested it yet, but it definitely seems promising. Speaking of metahuman and performance, metahumans have become a lot more performance efficient over time as Epic has upgraded them. It's also possible to remove a lot of unnecessary bones, like the face bones for example. You could have a separate mesh using those bones for cinematics and a mesh using a skeleton with them removed during gameplay. Another way to optimize the performance of metahumans is to downscale all the textures. This makes them surprisingly performance efficient, and it seems to only be getting better. Okay, I have dragged this out long enough. How do my animations actually work? I'm using Unreal's new motion matching system for the base movement states like running and crouching. This is a very interesting but still somewhat unstable system. Compared to traditional animation blend spaces, this system takes things like movement trajectories into account to determine what animation to use. Of course, you can code your own trajectory system, but this solves a lot of problems for you. There are a lot of variables to tweak and many ways to debug this system. After getting these variables just right, it feels very smooth. I blend animations into traditional animation sequences during various movement phases. For example, the sliding animation is a very simple animation that I created using Unreal's posing system. It's definitely not as powerful as doing your animations in, say, Blender or other animation tools. But here's the thing, I love modeling in Blender, but I suck at animating, and this approach is kinda working for me. Most of the animations seen on the arms in first person are procedural and leverages inverse kinematics, which basically means that the arms bend correctly when the hands move around. An interesting example is when climbing over an edge, we calculate the corner of the edge to climb, then offset the value to the left and to the right to determine the new hand positions. We can then place the hands at these world coordinates using IK, and voila, we got some climbing going. Something that probably flies under the radar for many people is how the weapon moves around, whether standing still, looking around or walking. But this is something I've spent an unreasonable amount of time perfecting. I think it's incredibly important for the overall feel of the game, as it's something the player will see the entire time. I'm not fully happy with it yet, but it's quite good for now. Another movement animation I haven't talked about yet, which you might have seen in some clips, is when the player runs up to a low corner, instead of climbing over it, she vaults over it. I've also implemented a turn-in-place animation, which uses the motion matching and leverages the root bone to offset the animation based on the camera's rotation. So do I have a roadmap? Yes. But it's currently very small, and as I go forward I want to flesh this out and plan further ahead. But as of now, the next step will be enemy AI and focus on the combat. I will be adding things like projectile weapons to the enemies and the ability for the player to dodge roll attacks. I also want to throw in some level improvements into this phase. In the next video we'll take a look at this and possibly more, so subscribe so you don't miss it. Oh, and I now also have a Blue Sky account where I post weekly updates about the game. You can find a link for that in the description. Bye!